I was a junior in high school, and art had always been my passion. In high school, I was blessed to have an art teacher that I responded to and enjoyed and learned from. And one evening, after class was over, I was sitting in the classroom doing some last-minute stuff on a project that we'd been working on, and he came up to me and he says, "Fred, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to do something connected with the art. I've thought about maybe going to commercial arts, in commercial art studies." And he looked at me kind of quizzically and he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Well, why? Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, I don't know of too many that make much of a living doing that now, and I know that you enjoy your math and do well." He says, "Have you ever thought of architecture?" And I hadn't. I was in a small town in Idaho. I don't know that there was an architect in the community, so it wasn't a name or a profession that I had much familiarity with. But when he said that, it got me pondering. I went on through graduation of high school, and then into my first year of college. I was in Pocatello, Idaho. Idaho State University was there, and I discovered they had a fledgling architectural department. And halfway through that first year of architectural studies at Idaho State, my professor called me into his office. And he says, "Fred, I've been thinking about you and where you're going." He said, "I don't think Idaho State is the place for you. And I'd like to suggest that you think about maybe furthering your education somewhere else." And so at that time, as my dad and I began to do a little research, we discovered that Roger Bailey had just decided to come to the University of Utah. And he came with great credentials and a great reputation and was beginning this program here. And that got me then to move on from Idaho State down to the University of Utah, which I ended up loving the whole time. But I remember that the first year class that year at the University of Utah had 60 students. And incidentally, not one of them was a woman, which now I think a lot about. Back then I didn't so much. That would have been 1957. And I graduated in 1962 with my Bachelor of Architecture, and then decided for some reason that I'm not sure makes any sense to me now, that I might like to be involved in teaching. And with that in mind, I applied to Columbia University in New York. We were accepted. We had a scholarship. My brand new wife had a job, and it was then that we discovered we were going to have our first baby. And that put doubt into our minds as to whether we wanted to travel clear across the country to New York City. And I made application then to the University of California in Berkeley and was accepted. And they accepted my scholarship, which was an AIA scholarship. And so we headed off to Berkeley. And I spent a year doing graduate work in Berkeley. And in 1963, received my master's degree from Berkeley. And so I visited several firms in San Francisco, but they weren't looking for people, and it was a difficult time to find meaningful employment. San Francisco was even then expensive place to live, and so I looked into coming back home. We had our first child at the end of that year, so becoming a father put a whole different slant in my looking at where I should go. But in any event, I was able to find employment with John Clausen an architect in town, and spent a couple of years there working with him. And then had an opportunity to go from there to work with Don Panushka. I remember being paid the amazing wage of $1 an hour.
Wow.
After being with Don and his firm for a while, I was able to join up with Boyd Blackner. He has recently come back into the city, having worked for a rather well-known architect back east by the name of Victor Lundy. And he was intrigued with the use of interesting shapes using glulam beams. And that was quite that set him apart from most of the architects in town that time. That's when my life took quite a turn. Two good friends of mine from the University of Utah in the department, Ralph Evans and Albert Christensen, approached me wondering if I'd have an interest in being a part of a small firm that they were going to organize. And that was really exciting to me. So I made that decision to leave Boyd and to join with Ab, we called him, and Ralph, and we referred to the firm as Architects Planners Alliance. And we were in the attic of the Aviation Club building on South Temple, way up in the top, dark. But there we were, working it out and trying to find work and having some success and not so much. But
what type of work were you doing?
Well, whatever came our way, honestly. Ab was quite interested in commercial work and government work. So he was able to get a few things in that area. Ralph loved doing residential work and found some of that, and that's where I leaned as well, is into the residential end of the practice. Wally Wright came to us indicating that he was interested in turning the old bus barns into a shopping center, and would we be interested in helping him do that? And there things began to grow. And we moved from the Aviation Club building up into the top loft space in the old trolley barns and set up shop there. That was when the first crisis in my life happened as it related to my practice, in that on one Monday morning I got a phone call at home telling me that Ab had passed away the day before. He had been mowing his lawn and had a heart attack, and he was gone. And he really was the glue that held everything together. So Ralph and I had to look at each other and say, what do we do now? And that put a whole different dynamic into my life at the time, but we were blessed, and we kept at it. Ab had just started doing a home for Robert Redford down at Sundance. And I remember the days when Mr. Redford and his wife would come into the office, and how humorous it was to sit there and see them in the conference room. And because our conference room could be seen by the Trolley Square people outside, it was interesting how quickly 50 people would be congregating around our conference room trying to behave like they're just shopping. Not too long after Ab had passed away, Redford called me and said, would you take over the project? I was already pretty busy with what I was doing, and his project became extremely intense. So I was going back and forth to Sundance 3 and 4 times a week, trying to keep up with everything. But we survived that, and Trolley became a pretty successful place, and we loved being involved with it. Trolley, in becoming successful, had leased up all of the space they had And we were in a pretty prime spot with our office. And Wally came to us one day and said, guys, I can make more money by leasing your space out to retail than you want to pay. Can you think about moving somewhere? We, at that time, did begin that in earnest and found 6 bays of old historical space down on Exchange Place. And it was then that John Pace, who had been a member of Architects Planners Alliance, and I decided, along with Ralph, that we would bite the bullet and buy these six bays. Ralph at that time was having some difficulty with his work and asked if he could be excused from that. And that's when John and I created what we called Babcock Pace. And after 5 or 6 years with John, things have a way of changing, and we decided that we would go our separate ways, and that's when it became Babcock Design Group. I was drawn to residential projects. I found that I loved the relationship that I was able to create with the client. I loved the opportunity I had of doing something that changed their lives in a positive way. I found out a very profound truth for me, that back then, the most important thing I thought in the successful practice of architecture was to create and maintain relationships. I never saw myself as being a great designer. I never saw myself as being given awards and things like that for architecture, but I love the fact that we could create relationships that went on and on. One day, I had a call from a real estate agent up in Park City that was a friend, and he said, Fred, if you can come up in the next day or two, I have a client here that I'm serving that I'd like you to meet. I was introduced to a wonderful Jewish couple from New York who had purchased a piece of land in Park City and wanted to do a wonderful home. And they interviewed me to do that and decided that we should work together. And that became a life-changing experience for me personally. We did that home. And as I say, it just created a great relationship. And he called me one day and he said, Fred, are you ready to start over with another one? And I said, well, what do you mean? How would that be? And he said, well, the one you just did, I know I've only been in it 6 months, but a guy knocked on my door and wanted to pay me twice what I have in it, and I just can't turn that down. So we got to do it again. So he found another piece of land, and off we went, doing another wonderful home for him. Then, during the course of that building, he would call me at least once a week, and on one occasion he said, Fred, how would you like to do a building at Tufts University? He said, I want you to come back and I want to introduce you to the rabbi of the HILLEL at Tufts. Well, here I am, a Mormon architect from Salt Lake, going back to Boston to meet with the Jewish rabbi and not knowing then what a HILLEL even was. But my friend Marty Granoff, had determined that he was going to donate the money to build their HILLEL at Tufts. And he wanted me to be the architect for that. So off I went, not having any idea what lay ahead, meeting Jeffrey Summit, the rabbi, getting on an airplane with him and rented a car and spent the whole day going all through New England looking at every HILLEL we could get to. Now, a HILLEL, I found, was very much like an LDS Institute of Religion on our campuses here, in that it was a place for parents to have their young kids go off to school and feel like they're going to be protected and nurtured and taken care of, and both from the studying and from a religious, from all of those points of view. That just so intrigued me. So anyway, I found myself looking forward to a meeting that probably made me as anxious and nervous as any meeting I'd had up to that point. In that the dean of Tufts University, who was the head of construction, wanted to meet with me and see whatever little sketches that we had to go to begin with. He came out and I went into his office, and the first thing he said to me was, "What do I need with an architect from Utah?" And there was a part of me that had to agree. If I were him, I'd be wondering the same thing. Well, I stuttered and stammered and went through what I had. I think he was pleased to see it, but I left that meeting wondering, this isn't going to work. I got out in my car and I called my friend Marty down in New York, and I said, "Marty, I don't think this is going to work, and I don't want to get in the way of what you're trying to accomplish here." Well, he said, when I was a kid in the public streets of Brooklyn, where I was raised, it was during the Second World War, and there were lots of things that you couldn't get. And one of those things was rubber. And Spalding made a little pink rubber ball that we used for everything we did. We played stickball with it, we threw it against the wall, we did every game we had, but no one else had a Spalding but me. And he said, if we got in an argument or they got mad, I just put the ball in my pocket and went home. He said, "This is my Spalding." Well, it turned out that it was, and it was a wonderful experience of working with the rabbi and all of those that were involved and creating this new Hillel at Tufts University. What happened then is I suddenly became known for the Hillel architect. And we then did another one in Brown University down in Providence. I did another one in Maryland, consulted in Florida, consulted in California. I was traveling all across the country helping people to work out their Hillel plans. And they would introduce me as their Mormon architect from Utah. And the looks on the faces of the men there, it was really pretty humorous. The reason I even went into architecture was that I loved to draw. And that in itself helped me go through each year of college doing well because I was able to draw as well as anyone in the class. And those were the moments that I most enjoyed, was sitting down by myself and sketching, generally with a pencil, and bringing ideas out on paper. It's what it was all about. I had no interest in it. And one day I walked into the office, and there, sitting by his desk, was a big plotter. I don't know, I think he'd paid $200,000 or something for it. I think he went way out on the limb. And I thought, Ralph, what are you doing? But he had more foresight than I did, obviously. And then as things gradually went along, as we moved down into Exchange Place, and everybody then had to have a computer at their desk, but me. It became inevitable that this is where it was headed. And for the first time in my life, I had the impression that I was out of my league. I didn't understand how computers worked. I didn't have any interest in it. I just wanted to draw. And when they took the drawing component away from me, that was where I began to lose interest. And to see now what comes out of the computer is just staggering. But it left me behind. I think I made it work by transitioning what I did and being able to transition what I did into more of the relationship component of the firm. I was never very strong politically, but over the years I had been able to create people who, through these relationships, who were willing to be helpful to me in going forward. And actually, it was through a relationship with John Huntsman, where years before I'd been asked to do a home for them up in Park City for their family, which proved to be a wonderful experience. But it created a relationship with John that led then to being able to do their corporate headquarters building up in the Research Park, but most importantly into the Huntsman Cancer Institute. I think those like me who would think of architecture as being a place to express yourself with your hands, with the pencil, is probably much less. I think there are many, many, many very creative individuals who don't like to draw. And I find that a little bit discouraging, because I think that's where the essence of creativity comes from internally, is out through your fingers and into a pencil. And that seems to have disappeared. I could go through multiple houses that meant so much to me. The HILLELs that we were involved in back east are a big part of my life. The first phase of the Huntsman Cancer is another one that I hold in my memory bank. It's one's ability to function within the political structure of obtaining new work. That was just a very, very frustrating part of my practice for me, and that we were just rarely successful in plowing through that terrain. The interviewing process is a huge part of that, and I was never very comfortable. We were successful a couple of times. We did the broadcast center at the university. Huntsman was an example of going through that process and being successful. But other than that, there were a lot of second places. So I think it was just maybe an insecurity of going through the interview process. And maybe that's one of the reasons I spent so much time in residential work, is I didn't have to go through that process. And also working with developers, commercial developers, who would come to you to see you. You didn't have to go to them. So I loved that part of it. One of my employees, some years back, came in, stood in front of my desk, and said, "Fred, I want to be like you. What do I do?" And the first thought that came to my mind is maintain and keep your relationships. I know I've said that 4 or 5 times today, but it truly has been an important component of my life, not only my practice, but I think my life. I want to maintain the relationships with people that I care for and who I think care for me.